Hello, friends. I'm Rita Boyer, educator at Prospect Presbyterian Church in Maplewood, New Jersey. I want to thank you for joining me for our ConnectEd lesson for October the 4th. And I also want to thank the people at Seasons of the Spirit who have given us permission to use their curriculum online. We have been hearing stories about Moses and the people that he led through the wilderness. Those stories are from the second book of the Bible. Do you remember what we call that book of the Bible? The one that comes right after Genesis? Exodus. Yes, and today's story is from the 20th chapter of Exodus. But before we hear the story, I have a question for you. How many of you have been camping? Many of my friends went camping this summer. Some of them went camping because they weren't able to travel as far as they normally do for a summer vacation. But camping was something they could do with their families outdoors. And so they camped, sometimes in a tent. Have you ever slept in a tent before? Usually when we sleep in a tent, it is for one night or a weekend, or maybe a whole week's vacation. But then we pack our tent up and we go home to our comfy beds. Well, Moses and the Israelite people slept in tents, but their tents were their homes. That's right. After all, they were traveling in the wilderness for 40 years. And so they had to carry all of their belongings with them, including their home, their tent. They would pitch a tent and sleep there as long as they were staying in that particular place. And then when it was time to go, they would pack up their tents and all of their belongings and travel a little further, and then stop, stay in those tents once again, until it was time to move on as they made that 40-year journey to the land that God had promised. Well, as you can imagine, that wasn't easy. The sun was hot in the wilderness during the day, and that sand would burn their feet. Their feet would get tired and dirty. The people would get impatient and grumble. They would get irritable and forget how to live in God's loving ways. Well, one day, the people of Israel pitched their tents at the foot of a mountain called Mount Sinai. They stayed there at the foot of the mountain, but God wanted Moses to go to the top of Mount Sinai. Moses did as God wanted, and there God spoke to Moses. God gave the people of Israel, through Moses, ways of living together as a loving community. In fact, you could call the words that God gave to Moses rules of love. Rules that would help them care for one another and show their love for God. There were 10 of these rules of love. First, love only God as your God. Second, don't create carvings and statues of false gods. They're idols. They're not the true God who loves you. Third, God said, my name is important. Please only use my name for good and praise. Fourth, on one day of the week, you should rest and keep that day holy. That day will be a Sabbath. Fifth, love your parents and listen to them. Sixth, be respectful of all living things. 7, be faithful and loyal to the person that you marry. 8, respect what belongs to other people. 9. Be honest at all times. And 10. You have been given many things. It's not good to look at what your neighbors have and want those things as well. So when God finished speaking, all of Mount Sinai was covered in smoke. There was thunder and lightning. There was even the sound of a trumpet. And the people of Israel spoke to Moses and said, Moses, when you speak with us, we will listen, but please tell God not to speak with us. We're frightened. They were so frightened that they thought they would die. But Moses told the people not to be scared. God spoke to us with love, Moses said. God gave us rules so that we could be a loving community together. Do you remember how many rules of love God gave to Moses so that Moses could give them to the people? How many? 10. Right. I wonder what rules of love you would come up with if you were writing them. I have this wonderful book that's called The 11th Commandment. 11? Really? How many did we say there were? 10. Well, the 11th commandment comes as wisdom from our children. It's written by the children of America. If they were writing an 11th commandment, they would say things like, do not pick on people because of their race, or if they're male or female. Another said, do not be mean or stare at people with disabilities. And these are the pictures that they drew to go along with those commandments or words of love. You shall treat men and women equally, and thou shalt not address people by their color. You can see those pictures as well. And there's a whole book full of the 11th commandment as children imagine them. Well, you are wise children too, and I'd like to know what your suggestions are for the 11th commandment. Think about that. Maybe you want to draw a picture and write an 11th commandment, and I would love to see what you come up with. Would you please take a picture of it and send it to rita@prospectchurch.org. Maybe we could come up with our own book, or I could find a way to share them with other people. That would be great. On the website, ppcfaithformation.org, you'll also find this Loving Ways activity sheet. You can see some examples of how we can live together in loving ways, and you can add your own. You know, one of the reasons why we call these rules of love is because they are rules that show God's love to others, but they also help us to feel that love. Because the wonderful thing about it is that when we follow a rule of love, we find that we are happier. Our hearts are fuller. So, would you please pray with me? Loving and gracious God, we do give thanks for your rules of love. Help us to live together as a loving community, even when things are difficult, even when we get impatient. Help us to remember your words of love and to live by them. Amen. Thanks for joining me. Have a great week. I hope to see you next week. if not before. Bye-bye.